All right, we are recording for our description of our slow shutter long exposure project. So again, if you click on the Google Docs, it has a bunch of good links on it. The first link I'm going to share are some examples. So these are things I would check out, today or tomorrow, and start thinking about what you would want to shoot for this project. So I'm just going to share some different types. So we got cool moving water long exposures. You notice it's like after sunset. You can get longer exposure times once the sun is down. Astrophotography, so shooting the night sky. It's very dark, so we need to open up our shutters to gather more light over time. And so the shot's probably around 30 seconds. Water moving is cool. So shooting the daytime is harder. Shooting water moving in like after sunset's easier. Just a pro tip. So if you want to capture like cool water motion blurring happening, those are cool. Rivers and stuff or creeks are cool. Water's flowing over the rocks are cool. Astrophotography is something known as star trails, and that's when you open it for a lot longer, so like maybe minutes to hours, and the Earth spins, and so while it's spinning, it's capturing that rotation of the Earth spinning, which is kind of cool for star trails. These are super long star trails, so these were probably like all night. They took an exposure, capturing the spinning. This one, they took probably like a 20-second exposure, and then on the last maybe 10 seconds, they slowly zoom the camera lens, if you have like a zoom lens, and it'll capture that kind of zoom streak effect, which is kind of cool to do. So light painting is where you open the exposure for a long time, and then you capture light moving. And so this is steel wool, very dangerous, but looks cool. If you're going to use steel wool, make sure you do it in an area that you can't catch stuff on fire, because it's literally shooting hot metal sparks. I don't advise you to do it because it's very dangerous. I've had students do it in the past. They shot it at the beach on the sand and then in a tunnel that was all concrete. You could just use a little handheld light. So they're running around this couple with the light, maybe about 8-second exposure, more steel wool. Using a sparkler, so they wrote cookies, and he's looking like the Cookie Monster dad. Light trails from cars, so quite a few students like to shoot this stuff. If you're like on a busy street, you can capture the brake lights or the headlights of cars or trucks or buses moving by, which look really cool. So you just open the exposure and then they drive across, and then you capture that light moving across. So a good example of a slow shutter, you could be shooting, and this is like in a tunnel, and if you did like a second exposure where you're shooting through the front windshield, it'll capture kind of cool motion blur stuff happening. This is the trail of a plane flight path, like the cool lights at night. This photographer, Mark Thompson, is pretty cool. He's a good follow on Instagram. This cool like moody lights at night stuff. Looks really cool. Showing people moving. So those are some examples. I'm going to show some more real quick. So these have some good slow shutter examples in this one. So we got light painting. Do you need a tripod? They talk about camera shake and all those kind of things. So motion blur is where you could take a photo at maybe a 50th of a second or half a second, and whatever isn't moving will be frozen, and whatever is moving will show that motion blur. So depending on how much blur you want, you control the shutter speed, and then you tell the camera, okay, I want to open for this long, and then it'll capture that motion blur. You could do something as Michele did with panning. So depending on how fast your subject is, maybe you're shooting in a car or a bicyclist or a plane or something, and you pan with them. So you're moving the camera as they pass by. This one was maybe a 30th of a second, and you could go a little faster, a little slower, depending on how much blur you want. But as long as you're moving the camera at the same speed of your subject, you can capture, and like anything that's not moving will blur, and whatever you're painting with will stay sharp. I can only do 30 seconds max. So with the astrophotography, Michele is asking about shutter speeds. you can switch it to the bulb mode, which is B on the top dial. Yeah, Kwang's accurate too. Yeah, the B mode, there's bulb mode. So what the bulb mode is, you press it once to start the exposure, and it'll stay open until you press it again. So you could leave it open for hours and then just press it again. Just keep in mind, it's gonna keep building light, so if you're in a bright area, it's gonna like get really bright over that time. So it's usually on the top dial where the shooting modes are. It should have like a B mode, or when you have it in the shutter speed, just keep rolling it to 30 seconds and then go past 30 seconds, and it should say B for bulb, like in the shutter when you're scrolling through the shutter speed. So these are cool. So you could rotate or move the camera as it's open, or zoom it as it's open. So again, you could do like, half a second or something. And if you have a zoom on your lens, you can zoom it and then it'll capture that motion blur, which is kind of fun to do. Or again, you could like move with the subject, sort of like a painting. And then it kind of shows more of, super long exposure, water movement stuff, light painting. So lots of good examples. You could have like city lights, and what they're doing there is they're literally shooting the lights and then moving the camera, and the streaks of the camera movement are capturing the lights. That's kind of fun to do, or you're moving the camera of the lights. So lots of stuff you can try out. So check out those examples. Again, what we're going to be doing is create 10 long exposure or slow shutter captures. Go for a variety of types. You can use a full camera or a smartphone. I'll show this video in a second of me doing it with my wife's car. Lots of good links here. So if you're not quite sure about camera settings, a lot of these videos are very good about explaining how to use camera settings. This one also talks about if you don't have a tripod, what options you could do, like using a shoe or a stool or a ladder or a chair. And this one is good too, using park benches or structures to place the camera on if you don't have a tripod. So this link here is for how to do long exposure on your iPhone using the standard camera app. And what you're going to do is use the live photo function, and then you can change it to a long exposure effect. And so I'll show that real quick. Just going to stop presenting and then pin myself. So on your smartphone, well, on the iPhone, actually I might need to, de-blur my background here. And, there we go. So you're just going to open up the standard camera app, and then on the top, just make sure your live photo is turned on. So it says live off. I'm just going to turn it on, and now it says live. And so what that does when you take a photo, so I'm just going to take a photo and move my camera around real quick. Oh, sorry, I took a video. Okay, so here's my standard live photo. Try to get the exposure better. There you go. So when you swipe up, I'm just going to swipe up. It gives you different live photo options where you can do kind of animated GIFs. You scroll over, there is, I'll get the exposure down. Come on, dude. Long exposure. So I'm just going to click that, and then I'll convert my photo into this crazy motion blur thing I'm doing with my long exposure. One thing about it is you can't control the time it does. It's basically about a second. There are apps, as I'm going to show you. I'll just present again. So the slow shutter cam app works a lot better. It's only it's cheap. It's only a one-time purchase. There's a good little tutorial on it here if you want to check it out, how to use it in different ways on your iPhone. I believe it's for Android too, if you want to use it as well. And so it goes in how to change the settings. So you can do a motion blur mode, light trail mode, or low light mode. You can change the sensitivity to light. You can change the shutter speed. So that's the nice thing about the slow shutter. With the long exposure on the iPhone, the standard, it's just like a 1 or 2 second thing. It's very short. This one, you can manually control the shutter speed and the ISO, which is nice. And so I'll show you that real quick. So I'm just gonna open it up. So it looks like this kind of purple, it says slow shutter. And then when you press the little settings, you get that little window. And so again, you can choose, are you shooting motion blur, light trails, or low light? You can choose the blur strength, and you can choose the shutter speed. So it goes all the way down to 1/8 of a second, so 1/8 of a second shutter speed, or it can go all the way up to 60 seconds for a timed one, or it can go to bulb. So if I swipe all the way over, that's bulb, and that's the same thing. I start it and then I stop it when I'm done, and so I can go for super long if I wanted to. And then at the bottom, you can control your ISO, which is how sensitive it is to light. So usually for long exposures, you really want the least sensitivity as possible. So I would recommend, if you're using a smartphone, to get the Slow Shutter Cam app, but I understand if you don't want to pay $1.99. But it is fun to play with. I use it a lot on my own. All right, just going back to Google Doc. So there are Android options too. The long exposure camera 2 is a good one for the Android. So the tip I'm saying is make sure your camera or phone is set up on a stable surface. Put the camera smartphone on a delay. So if you put on like a 2-second delay or a 10-second delay, basically when you press it, you're not hitting the shutter and jiggling the camera while you press the shutter. And so a lot of times when I do light painting, I'll put it on a 2-second delay or 10-second delay. So I'll press it, run over, do my light painting when it opens up after 2 or 10 seconds. And I would recommend working in a dark environment, whether indoors or outdoors, works best with less light. So you'll get much better results if you're shooting after sunset, at nighttime, or indoors where you can turn off all the lights and block like window light. Once you've created your 10 long exposure or slow shutter captures, you're going to edit three of them to enhance the details, colors, brightness, or contrast. Again, you can use Photoshop Express, Pixel, or Photo P. And then you're going to upload those 13 photos. So 10 captured, 3 edited, and that's due Tuesday, December 1st. So I wanted to have Monday where we can kind of regroup and talk about what we did over break. And if we shot stuff and answer those questions, I can show you some editing demos. And then Tuesdays when it's due after break. So for student examples, this student shot it on the Slow Shutter Cam app at home in her room. So she turned off the lights, got a little handheld light, and then she put different colored gels on her little light, her flashlight, and then tried different light painting designs. So tried an angel here, different colors. But pretty good for a smartphone, shooting with the Slow Shutter Cam app. Good stuff. Just gonna open up this PowerPoint. So these are examples from students that were in March, or sorry, actually in April and May. So these are students shooting at home just like you guys were. So this is from this last school year. And these were completely optional for them to boost their grade up. So this one she shot blocking the window light of her brother reading using a handheld light. She edited it to enhance those brightness and the details. Just holding a cool samurai sword doing light painting. String lights are cool. If you put them in front of the camera, like wiggle them around, you get cool like string light stuff happening. So moving lights in cool ways around objects. She put the light behind the fan, which I thought was kind of cool. You can light products really well. So you can see here the controller, you can get really kind of smooth, creamy light when you do like a long exposure light painting of a product. And then this was like a little object running across, which I thought was funny. And then one more from a student. So he shot these outside at night. And he basically, would light his friend with the light and then point the light towards the camera. So if you want your subject to light, you point the light towards them, light them up for a certain amount of time. And then the second you point the light towards the camera, it'll pick up those movements. So he tried some different light paintings with his friend at the park, different poses. Him shooting off light streaks. This one was cool. So he lit him twice. So he had his friend stand here, lit him once for like 5 seconds, moved him over here, lit him again, and then did the light painting in the middle. So he's like interacting with himself, which is cool. So you probably want like a 30-second exposure here just so you have enough time. So just trying different lighting. And then his 3 edited photos. So bringing out the colors, enhancing the colors on the light, and also adding some clarity and sharpness to get them sharper and more focused just on the light. So some good examples there. So last thing I wanted to share was the video that I made in the spring. So this was during COVID. I basically set up, I drove down to Coronado and got my wife's car parked where basically you had a view back from Coronado to downtown San Diego. Backstory is, we were there taking photos. I started doing a demo and recording the video, and then a cop showed up because we were parked in a handicap spot, and a neighbor like called and complained because she had nothing better to do. And so once the cop talked to us, and I explained like, "Hey man, I'm a teacher. I'm trying to do a demo here, and my wife just got this car." Like he's like, "All right, you can go." Like we get complaints all the time from this lady, so he was pretty cool about it. But obviously, be respectful of parking where you park your cars. So I'm just gonna play this video. It's about 4 minutes. Hi guys, Mr. Bartels here. I'm doing a little demo for how to do light painting. So what I'm going to be doing tonight is I've got a car set up with the Mazda MX-5. So we're going to be shooting this with the background over the San Diego Bay from Coronado. And so I'm going to show you my camera settings. So as you can tell here, I got my camera set up on a tripod. And so it's fixed. And so basically wherever I shoot from, it's going to be in a fixed position. So I can light any side of it and it'll all be put together in post in Photoshop, or I can do it just one light swoop together. So I'm just gonna turn on my camera real quick and then I can show you my settings. And so you can kind of see here, we got a 30-second exposure. I have it on a 10-second timer, and I have my aperture at f13, so that way I can let more light in from the city. And then my ISO is set to L, which is actually ISO 50. And so you can actually see my drive mode is at a 10-second. I have it on manual focus. That way every shot will be the same focus point. So I focus on the front part of the car. So that way you can actually, every shot will be the same focal point. I can actually move it to the background later and then put that into Photoshop. And then have it on RAW, so that way I have more flexibility. You could shoot this in JPEG. I have my white balance set to sunlight. And that way, when I do multiple exposures, it's not going to change around. It's not going to change the color temperature. So that way it's fixed as well. And so my ISO is set to L. I could go up to 100 or 200. You can see it gets brighter. And so you just you can play with that in camera depending on how bright you want your light to show up or how bright you want your background to show up. All right, guys, so what I'm going to do now is actually do the light painting. So I'm going to start my timer. Set a 10-second timer, and then I'm going to move my light over here if you want to follow me over. So what I'm going to do is use the light to light my subject. So I'm going to go and light the camera. So I waited for the 10-second timer delay to start. Get the wheels. Now it's going to be open for 30 seconds. Different sections. And as long as my light doesn't face the camera, it won't show up in the photograph, so as long as I kind of keep it turned away. All right, let's check it out. So that's our light painted Mazda MX-5. Looks pretty good. So then what I can do is go through and play with the exposure, how bright I want it, and how what size of the car do I want to light. And then basically, as long as my camera doesn't move, I can just put in the pieces in Photoshop and just use the layer mask and paint the front side, the back side, the top side, so I can perfectly light each section, and that way it gets a nice result. So cool. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. So as you can see here, I did a light painting where I lit different sides of the car. and get a nice background of San Diego. So I move my tripod around, and then I light the wheels separately, light the hood, the foreground of the car, the background, the top, and so you can actually put it in Photoshop and enhance all those different angles. This one, you can see that I added some lighting where I face the light towards the camera. So when you face the light towards the camera, it actually shows up. And this one, I added a red gel. So I put a red gel over the color of the light. And then I started playing with it. And then this will be the final edit here. So anytime you face the light towards the camera, you can actually see the light. And then anytime it's faced towards the subject, it lights the subject. This last one, I used the slow shutter cam on my iPhone. I set it up and then did a long exposure on my iPhone, which is pretty cool. So cool. So I tried to explain as best I could, while I was shooting live and dealing with the people, but just kind of showing those examples. So again, a quick recap: you're going to shoot 10 different exposures. Again, you could do slow shutter stuff in the daytime, where you do 50th of a second or quarter of a second, and you're capturing like motion blur, or you're painting with the subject. Those are cool to try. Otherwise, you could try light painting. You could do long exposures at night as options. So I'm just going to stop the recording. All right.